full
Who was I
screen there. I
talking
love
to?
it.
Oh, now we're live. Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome
Love it.
to. I can't remember what number of Love Bomb Chat this is. Do you remember
Oh,
what
that's a good
what number
question.
it is?
I didn't
I
study for
feel
this
like
test. I'm sorry.
I feel like
Yeah,
it's 13 or 14,
it's
maybe
13,
something.
14, or 312. I'm pretty sure.
One of
It's one of
those.
those.
It
Yeah.
is one of those. But hello. I am very honored to have Theo, aka Rekindled Reader, here with me today because Theo was one of the first people I started talking to when I made a channel. And then Theo kind of disappeared into the ether for a little while. And I continued to pester you through Discord for the last year, being like, hey, you coming back? You coming back? And lo and behold, we've learned that being a nuisance works.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm back. It's so weird. I saw you making videos that were way better than everyone's, and I was like, why am I even trying? What's the
No,
point? You know?
that is
So I'm
not even
like,
accurate.
I'll
Not
just
even
turn
at
off
all.
the camera for a bit. I'll come back when I'm better. So
Heck
yeah.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
so I want to know, I mean, you've given a little bit of context of what you were kind of getting up to in the last year. Usually when I start
God.
these conversations, it's I want to know something that you've been reading and loving lately, but you were having a pretty good time in the year that you took off because you devoted that time to things that you wanted to do, I believe, that you felt like
Mhm.
you didn't have enough time to do. So before we get into what you've been reading and loving, I
Yeah.
want to know what you were doing that you were loving.
You know what? Hey Jason, I had a lot more time for just the other stuff. Like I was doing a lot of jujitsu. I was going back to the gym. I got back into fishing. I was fishing a lot
I
last
remember you
season.
said that. Yep.
Yeah, caught some nice fish. And I'm one of those people that it's sort of a gift and a curse. I love a lot of things. I have a lot of hobbies. I love
Yeah.
photography. I like cars. I like, hunting and hiking and fishing and a bunch of stuff. Video games, right? Movies, and it's hard to fit all that stuff in. And I know all
Yeah.
the parents out there are probably laughing like, like you don't have time. Like I know,
Yeah.
but still, it's hard to find time for stuff. And it sort of was an organic, like a couple things happened. I got busy and I couldn't keep up with YouTube, and then my camera broke, and I was like, oh man, I gotta like fix that before I can even do a
Yeah.
video. And one thing led to another, and I just started doing more of the stuff that I enjoyed and just never quite got back. So it wasn't like
Mhm.
I left YouTube to prioritize other things. I just
Sure.
couldn't quite circle back. And my parents did have some stuff where it kept me away for a
Yeah.
bit. And it just prolonged, I think, my absence. It was probably going to be a few months, and it turned into a year,
Yeah.
which is crazy. Now
Yeah.
I don't recognize BookTube anymore. It's completely
I
different.
know, right?
Who
It's
are these
so
people?
weird.
Yeah, it's
I know.
crazy.
I feel that way too though, and I'm still actively like I was making active content throughout that time. It's
Yeah.
just it's an ever evolving thing, which I feel is really great. Hey Shad, because anytime we think that we've heard everyone's opinion on a particular book or series, there's always someone that comes in with a new hot take. And I'm like, oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I never really
Yeah.
thought about it that way. So I always love when we get these new infiltration of voices. And I mean, it's pretty normal. I feel that a lot of the time we might want to break. Certain times of the year, we're not going to maybe be as active. I know a lot of people kind of do a bit less in the summer and or
Yeah,
around,
totally.
the end of the year. So I think it's good to afford ourselves those breaks, especially if we're not doing this as a living. I know
It's
for
true.
people that
Yeah.
if that's their situation, it's inherently different and it's their livelihood, so it's
Yeah.
their job. But for
Do you
people that are
think
doing it recreationally, no.
do you think those people enjoy it as much as they did, or as
No.
much as they could? That
No.
can't possibly be the case, right?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like it's pretty difficult when something starts out as a passion project and it becomes a job because let's
Yeah.
be real, that's what it is. I think that
Yeah.
there's different ways you can go about approaching it. I feel like for the people that have done it and continue to do it, their big motivator is the community that they formed around themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that they get a lot of that external to BookTube. It'll be their Discord channels or the Patreons. I think that some creators can love it. I think
Totally.
if you're a really high energy
Yeah.
person, also maybe if you're not a parent, like if that's,
A lot of variables. Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of variables for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it can ebb and flow like anything else. I think you might get more invested with certain projects that you're doing for YouTube or certain books or series. And when you hit one that's not working for you, but it's a Patreon pick or a Discord pick, and you go, gotta suffer through this. So it definitely ups the stakes quite a bit. Hey, Daniel. So
Totally. Hi, guys.
I am excited because I watched your video, not your one that you released today, but we're going to talk about that, but your one a week or so ago. And you talked about your mid-month, what you were reading or like everything else. And I got really excited. And the reason I did is because you had The Will of the Many on the thumbnail. And I have been wanting to read that book.
What a banger. Oh my God.
Forever. Since last year. And I was like, I'm reading it today. So as soon as I finished listening to your video, I went and I got the audiobook for it. I'm not done yet because I was also reading Spear Cuts Through Water because that was my Patreon pick.
How far are you?
I think it's like 30%, 30 to 33%.
Okay. Enough to start to be having a good time, I hope.
He's at that festival right now. Like, there's a sewer scene happening. That's
oh my
where
God.
Yeah.
You're going to lose your mind, Laura.
So I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
You're going to lose your mind.
It's so good because people might know this, but I have been in a little bit of a slump right now where I read a couple of books. Yeah. Last month I read a couple of books that didn't jive with me. And I was like, I need something in the fantasy world that reinvigorates that spark for me. And it's been The Will of the Many so far. So
I'm so glad that you're liking it, even like at that point, because it shit kicks off and it just doesn't really stop and it starts to get really cool. I get bored easily, and it's not that I need a lot of plot or I need a lot of pacing or whatever, but like sometimes I just find myself less interested for a chunk of time. Yeah. And I didn't feel that at all. Like I read it.
I feel very similar.
Nonstop. Yeah. I'm so happy. That's awesome.
It definitely for me. So this is a love bomb. So I try to keep it exclusively to things that I really enjoy. But hey, Usman, one of the things lately this year I've read is the majority of Red Rising. And I have had a very positive experience with the first 3 books of Red Rising and a very not positive experience with the latter books of Red Rising. And Will of the Many is so akin to early Red Rising for me that I'm like, oh, it's hitting all the right vibes. But it's got all its own unique magic that it's imbued into this world, which I find so, so fascinating because that the whole concept of like the military academy or military college in a fantasy world, like that's not he's not reinventing the wheel with that trope, but it's a trope for a reason because we enjoy it so much and we keep going back to it. Right. So I'm definitely excited to keep going because I've heard very good things overall. I don't think I know anyone that's rated that book less than a 4. So I'm pretty jazzed for it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Red Rising is one that's very high on my TBR. And I haven't read it yet. I actually tried the audiobook years ago and stopped. At the time, I didn't love the narrator, which I think it's the same. I don't know who the narrator is. Kyle can actually jump in for me, but I think it's actually a narrator I've heard more. Did he do the Sun Eater books? No, can't possibly be the same guy.
So the narrator for Will of the Many is Ewan somebody.
Okay. But what about Red Rising? What about Red Rising?
I don't think it's the same person, but I could be wrong. I agree. I think you are definitely going to love Red Rising, especially the first few books. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I am going to. Tim Gerard Reynolds is right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, that's who does Red Rising.
At the time, I wasn't in the mood for, I think, an audio book, and that was the only way that I could get it. Then I ended up buying them, and then they slipped on my TBR, so they're actually on the very, very, very top of my bookcase.
I heard it.
And I have all of them except for Lightbringer.
Lightbringer,
And I'm excited to try them. And so I was curious to hear from someone that read and enjoyed Red Rising, if you saw the comparison or if you thought, it's kind of the same. That's right. I wonder what else does Tim Gerard Reynolds narrate? Because I feel like I've read him before and I liked him in something.
I will definitely know that. But so
anyway,
for me,
I'm excited for Red Rising.
I think you're really going to enjoy it. From the very onset of the book, it's similar in that there are clear class discrepancies, but the ways in which the classes are described are inherently different because for Will of the Many, it's definitely intersected with the magic.
Mhm.
Whereas in Red Rising, it's just stratas of society, basically. And there's the lowest of the low and there's the highest of the high. And you know from the very onset of the book with Will of the Many that there's something a bit ominous and mysterious about our
It's weird,
protagonist.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And with Red Rising, you're like, our boy is the bottom.
Right,
Like,
right,
it's
right.
the opening of the book.
Yeah.
So there's those kind of things. But I would say that
Okay.
the first 30% of the book definitely has comparisons between the two.
Okay.
But I think that there are enough distinctions between them as well that you're not sitting there going, okay, this is inherently a copy of Red Rising.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where I've heard Tim Gerard Reynolds. Thanks, Shad. He does Rhaenyra.
Hmm.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
There we go. But yeah, so I'm excited that you created that video because now it has compelled me to go in and actually read Will of the Many.
I'm so excited. I can't listen. When you get to that scene where
Mhm.
stuff starts happening, you got to message me. I want
I
to
will.
hear your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
So
super
good.
excited. It's my first. So I thought his name was James Islington because that's
That's
how
what
I
I
said.
thought.
Right? So it's
That
apparently Islington
I
because
said it
that's
in
what
my
they say in
video
the.
and it felt so
Yeah.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels awkward saying it. Like I don't like saying it that way, but I'm like, if that's
Yeah.
your name, that's your name. I will
Yeah.
say it
Yeah.
for you. But I didn't know that. But it's my first book by him that I'm reading, and I know that he has the Lycanis trilogy, which I have book
Yeah.
one of, but I haven't read yet. Have you read
Okay.
Lycanis?
Here's the thing. I wish you didn't bring this up. I wish you didn't bring
Okay,
this up because Kyle's in the chat and
he
he's
is.
going to roast me because I read the first two. I read the first one and did a dedicated review because I was like, I like this a lot more than most people did as a book one. Overly
Mm-hmm.
ambitious, a little bit of repetitive phrasing and stuff,
Sure.
but debut, whatever, it's fine. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I was reading halfway through book three and ADD Theo just like checked out and started doing other things. And
Yep.
I gave myself just a bit too long to get back.
And you never
And now
went.
I'm like, God damn it. Like now I have to reread that. But I feel like I can pick right back up. It's just,
Okay.
it's such a complicated and beautifully woven story over a lot of pages where I feel like I would do a
Sure.
disservice by just jumping right back in. So I want to,
Right.
that's why. So Kyle, I'm sorry, dude. That's why I put it off for so long because I want to give it time and go back and reread it. And I'll blast through the first two. So the answer is yes
Yeah.
ish. I read like 80% of it and I loved it. And I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was really, really cool. And the funniest thing is, people say, a lot of people that like this series, one of their
Mm-hmm.
biggest compliments is how it wraps up and how it ends. And people say,
Okay.
it's done very well. Like it really is a satisfying conclusion to a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just haven't quite got there yet. But I will
Yeah.
say the epilogues, he leaves every book just like the end of the Will of the Many blows your brains. Okay.
Kyle
And
said
the
that to me too.
Lycanis
He's
book,
like,
same.
it gets wild. So yeah, I'm really
The
excited.
last chapter, I was just like, no one talked to me. I'm reading it, and I'm just like, what is happening? And like, it's one of those books where you close it and then you stare at the wall for like half an hour, and you're like, what the
Yes.
hell does this mean? You know?
Uh-huh.
So
I
in like the
love an
best way.
ending like that. Oh, I love
Laura,
an
I
ending like
can't
that.
wait for you to read it. Yeah.
I'm really excited because so I was just I do a book club every month now with my husband, and this was
Cool.
our second month. And
Jealous. That's
we were
awesome.
doing it's fun. We were
Yeah.
doing Spear Cuts Through Water. Our live for that is gonna be Sunday. Spear is heavy. Like Spear, have you read
Okay.
Spear Cuts Through Water?
It's actually on my shelf.
Okay.
And I have it specifically out because I intend to read it. Then I
Mhm.
saw some stuff recently where some people had a big read along and some people didn't love it. I
So
don't know where
here's
I'm
the
going
thing.
to land with that.
I think I can see it going both ways for you, but I am going to lean more into the fact that I think you are going to like it. But and this is something that I'll
Ooh.
be talking about on Sunday. It is one of those books that I feel you can have a distinctly just visceral experience while reading. And then
Okay.
when you finish it, retroactively have an entirely different experience.
In a
Like it
good way
is
or a
in a
bad
good
way or
way,
both?
in a good
Oh,
way. So it's a really interesting read in that I know people that have taken months to read Spear and they really
wow.
liked doing it that way because they're
Yeah.
like, it is I needed to go slow. And I definitely can understand that. And then I know other people like Evie that are like, she reads it in like 2 days. But because that's just her favorite book of all time. But
Yeah.
I feel like it's a fine balance between
And Kyle,
Kyle's
I
caught
know it.
up now. Definitely. Here's a fun unrelated story. Speaking of ADD brain, my mom met Kyle today.
What?
Because yeah, my mom is in Kyle's town because that's where my grandmother lives, my mom's mother, and she's visiting her. So she met Kyle today.
That is amazing. So I live
Right?
on the West Coast in Vancouver, and I met
Yep.
Kyle one time because he came
Yeah.
out here.
Mm-hmm.
Him and his, I think, wife, pretty sure
Mm-hmm.
they're married.
They are.
And I also met
Abby, right?
Abby Salter, yeah.
Yep.
And who else came down?
Jake? I assume Jake was there,
Jake.
right?
That's right. Who else
Yeah.
came down? It was just, I believe it was just Jake and my wife. Of course, I have a wife.
Yeah.
It was so cool meeting everybody and high-fiving and stuff. So
Yeah,
cool.
I have only met.
So I'm jealous of your mom is basically what I'm
I
saying.
know, right? I have met Jimmy from the Fantasy Network because we live like
Jealous.
40 minutes apart from each other. So we've hung out a
Weird.
few times. Yeah. I didn't realize
Like
it
over the
until
border.
yeah. Well, so I'm in the US, but
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, I live in the US now. I'm from Montreal, but I live in Maryland. I've lived in the US for 7 years. But it was funny because I had him on for one of my early love bomb chats, and he and I were talking, and I said, we're having kind of weird weather where I am. So just as a heads up, and he's like, oh, where are you located? And I told him, and he's like, that's 40 minutes from me. I was like, oh, where do you live? And then, yeah, it just all kind of came to pass. But
That's
I
awesome.
think it's
Cool.
really fun when you can meet people from the
100%.
booktube community. So
there was a time where me and some friends, we were planning on flying to like meet each other, and it just never quite worked out. And so
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I know some people are going to meet at Dragonsteel, and that's going to be a big booktube meetup and hang, which is fun, but I won't be there.
No? Is it every year now? Is it every year?
It is.
No.
Yeah, it's every year.
Maybe next year.
That's the thing. I was planning to go this year, and because it's a Stormlight year, I started getting a little worried that it was just going to be way too many people. And I would rather go on a year that maybe is going to be smaller. I don't know if that's ever going to be the case, but Evie met Angela from Literature Silence Lines. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yes. So I am hoping it sold out in like an hour. Yeah, it was really fast. It was really, really fast. So I'm happy that I didn't end up being one of the people to compete for that. So I'm going to go now with the initial question that I usually ask, even though we're almost 20 minutes in, even though your answer might be Will of the Many, and that's fine. But what have you been reading lately, or what are you currently reading that you have loved or are really enjoying?
Okay. I wrapped up Will of the Many, and then I recently read Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. That is a very good book. It's shorter. It's like 350 pages, but it's very, very reminiscent of Boy's Life. Which if you watched my video,
I know you
one
love
of my favorite
Boy's
books.
Life. Yeah.
And it just hit the same notes in a very, very nice way. Completely different type of story, but very reminiscent. Kid in a small town in the 60s during a summer. Yeah.
This is what happened, Kyle.
It's just, and it's just a beautiful story about family and drama and trauma and death, and beautiful story. Very nice prose. I'll read more from him for sure. And I loved it. I gave it 4.5 and I rounded it to 5 for Goodreads because I thought it was super solid. And the cool thing is my wife is reading it at the same time, and she's really
remember that. Yeah.
She's like, and she's pretty picky on books. And about a quarter of the way, and she's like, I really like this. And I'm like, oh, okay,
awesome.
like sweet. So she's liking it, but I flew through it and I picked up like a random book, and I don't even know the name of it. It's called The Colorless Tsuruku Tazaki or something by Haruki Murakami.
Okay.
Let me just pull it up because there's more to the title. Hang on a second. It's called Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage by Haruki Murakami. And it's interesting. It's basically about this guy, this Japanese guy
Mm-hmm.
that has grown up through high school with 4 friends, 2 girls, 2 boys. And all of a sudden they stop. They're like family. Like they're so close. They do everything together. They met
Mm-hmm.
at school, and all of a sudden one day he's off to college. He comes back, tries to connect with them, and they've all shut him out of his life, out of their lives completely,
Mm-hmm.
with no explanation, no nothing. And he's like, what is happening? Tries to get in touch with them, can't get in touch with them. And now I'm probably halfway through. Throughout his
Mm-hmm.
life, he ends up meeting some other people, and there's some stories and stuff about his relationships and
Mm-hmm.
his work and all that stuff. But he meets this girl, and they're dating, and she really pushes him to reconnect. She's like, give me these people's name. Like, I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, where these people are. You have to, because he has a lot of trauma and a lot of lingering issues from that he doesn't even want to come face to face with.
Acknowledge.
So she's
Yeah.
pushing him. Yeah, she's pushing him like, look, there's a huge burden on your shoulders. Like, you should connect with these people and at least find out what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and work through some of this. And so now I'm at a point where he just gave her some of the info to go and try and find them. And then she said, if you decide to connect with them, that's your choice. But I just
Mm-hmm.
want to see if we can find them and at least give you the option.
Right. The
And that's where I
option.
am in the story. It's a very interesting story. I've never read Murakami. Very interesting. I'm doing it partly on audio, which is very
Mm-hmm.
nice, actually.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. This could go either
Love
way.
that.
This could be a 2-star and it could be a 5-star, and I have no
Right.
idea.
That's
Yeah.
how I felt with Spear Cuts Through Water. I was reading it and I was like, either end
And
of the
I'm
gamut
excited
here.
about it. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's cool though.
Hmm.
Have you felt like you've been reading more genre variety than when you were doing more booktube? Like since you've been gone, do you feel you've maybe been more experimental with your books?
No. Well, yes and no. So no, in the sense that when I was on BookTube, I was deliberately trying to read a little bit of everything,
Gotcha.
but I was being a little strict, and I was committing to reads and buddy reads and looking forward on
Yeah.
TBRs and stuff.
You
Whereas
did a lot of
now,
TBRs.
yeah, right. And it's hard
Mhm.
to, and I eventually they were like so big where I'm just like, I'm gonna read some of these. I don't know
Yeah.
which ones. And I realized early on that I'm very much a mood reader. So
Same.
yeah, and that's part
Yeah.
of the nice, that's part of the benefit of just allowing yourself to read and not be committed to booktube as much and just kind of
Yeah.
like letting it go. Right
Mhm.
now I'm reading kind of just off the cut, like random stuff, and they happen to
Mhm.
be different genres sometimes, which is,
Yeah.
so that's, yeah, I think I am, but not because of
Mhm.
booktube or not. It's just I'm
Sure.
allowing myself to mood read now. And
It's
who
the
knows what I'll
best.
pick up. Like, I don't
It's
know.
the best, honestly. Like
Yeah.
when I started BookTube, I went into it thinking, okay, there's an expectation that you have to put out a TBR, which for
Yeah.
me, when I was doing my degrees, I was a very regimented reader because you have to be like that is your designated reading.
Yeah.
And when it came to fun reading, I was thinking, no, I think I am just gonna allow myself to do this. So I think I did a few months of TBRs and then very quickly came to the realization I was like, this is done. I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna give you a wrap up at the end of the month. And
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I like TBRs. I love watching TBRs. I even like
Mhm.
making them. But here's why I like making them, because I like to sit down and go through some of the books that are on my mind that I feel
Mhm.
like I might want to read in the
Yeah.
right mood over the
Right.
next 30 to 45 days. Who knows if
Sure.
I'll get to them? I don't. So I felt a little bit like I was, putting out a TBR. I'm like, man, I feel kind of like I'm lying. Like I'm not gonna.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm gonna read these. What it
Yeah.
should be is like, here, let me share what mood I'm in right now and some of the
Yeah.
books that I'm looking forward to. And if I
Mhm.
read them, cool. If I don't, I'm sorry. Like, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and that's the thing because people would then start messaging me and
Yeah.
saying, "Are you enjoying X, Y, or Z?" And
Yeah.
I'd go, "I'm
It's
sorry, I
amazing how
haven't
they
even
follow.
looked
Yeah.
at them." Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, did you
And this
read this? You
weird
said you were going
guilt.
to. I'm so sorry. Like, no.
Yeah, no, I did not. I actually forgot that I even mentioned that book. I'm so sorry,
Yeah. What TBR
and
video? What are you talking about? Yeah.
right? And I feel like maybe Reds is a much more appropriate
Yeah.
thing for mood readers. You just put out a vibe and
100%.
you're like, maybe. But I
Yeah.
find now too, it's really interesting because it might be that on Monday I start a book and I'm really into it on Monday. And unless it's grabbed me from the very onset, Tuesday, I might go, I'm not in the mood for that book today.
So
And,
I'm 50% in to 3 different books right now.
there you go.
No,
You get it.
three or
Yeah.
four. I'm in the middle of some weird little book about cats, like these little, I can't remember. Let me pull it up because I actually want to tell you what I'm reading right now. Hang on.
Yeah. As Evie says,
Where's my,
OMR on my radar.
yeah. So I'm in the middle of Ship of Destiny, halfway
Okay.
through. I'm in the middle of a friend from high school's book, A Spark from Embers.
Okay.
Local author. Maybe I'll talk about it when I finish it. I'm in the middle of
Nice.
the Murakami book, and I'm in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of this like cat's book. Where is it? I forget what it's
I am
called.
interested
Something.
by the
No.
cat book.
Where is it? What is it called? It's something about cats. Like some weird little like cozy fantasy, like weird
Love
little
it.
magic story about cats, and I can't remember what it's called. So
So,
that
speaking
yeah.
of
Anyway,
cozy fantasy and fantasy
yeah.
in general, have you found that there is a subgenre of fantasy that always is kind of a hit for you where you pick it up and you go, yep, this is my vibe? Have you found that subgenre?
I'm still experimenting, but I think I'm a sucker for traditional quest fantasy, heroic fantasy,
I can see
as
that for
long
you.
as, yeah, as long as it's
Yeah.
not like meandering, but I'm very plot driven. So, for
Okay.
example, someone like Brandon Sanderson who can do a little bit of everything,
Yeah.
he's such a good plotter that like it doesn't really matter what the vibe is. I'm like there for the
You
ride.
like it. Yeah.
Whereas it can be a very good quest fantasy. Well, I shouldn't say good. It can be a quest fantasy
Right.
and feel very meandering, and the
Mm-hmm.
quest itself or the characters themselves maybe don't keep me as invested. So it still needs to
Mm-hmm.
be like hitting the right notes for me, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely a sucker for like heavy trope, orphan farm boy, quest fantasy. That's why Faithful and the Fallen is so high on my list. I love that series. And some
I
people are
know
like, this is,
you
I
do.
think
I'm
you
so
read
sorry.
Malice, right? And you were like, what the hell is this?
I gave it 1.5 stars. I
Yeah.
was not my vibe.
And I gave it a 5, I think. Like it goes
Uh,
to show what
yeah.
you pick out from these books, right? To me,
Oh,
and it's,
definitely.
you know what's interesting about Malice? A lot of people say the characters fall flat and they're just like they're kind of cardboard cutouts, which I can see maybe in book 1 I'm like, okay, like maybe there hasn't been a whole, like I can kind of see that criticism. I
Yeah.
loved it. Like from page 1 I was like, this is my family now. Like I love these people. And I have no idea why. I have no idea
That's
why. I
so
just
funny.
loved
I
it.
mean, I was
Yeah.
I was saying I believe I vocalized this in the live. I might not have because I had a lot of
Yeah.
things to say in basically an hour. But similar to Wheel of Time, I feel like a lot of these epic fantasies. I'm not going to classify Stormlight in this one because I think that
Okay.
for me, of the epic fantasies that I've read, Stormlight is my favorite.
Sweet.
And I have my issues with Wheel of Time. I had my issues with Malice. I
I
think
haven't read
that
Wheel of Time.
don't,
Okay.
but you will
That's
love
what I
it
get told.
based on the fact that you love Malice so much. But here's the thing, and this kind of comes
Okay.
to my point. I think if Malice is the first big scope epic fantasy you read, chances
Mhm.
are you're really going to like it. Same way that if Wheel of Time is the first one that you read, you're probably really going to like it. Because I think it really depends on where you encounter these books on your reading journey overall and your fantasy reading journey specifically. Because if you grew up reading Wheel of Time and A Song of Ice and Fire, by the time you pick up Malice, you go, I've seen this before. And I've seen where this is inspired from. Whereas if you pick it up
Yeah.
and you haven't read any of that and you don't have that context, I can see you saying, I love this, because there's no
So
comparison.
I did it in precisely the right way. I didn't read Wheel
Yes.
of Time.
There
I
you go.
read Faithful and the Fallen early on in my rekindling, fantasy journey, right?
Yeah.
And then I never read A Song of Ice and Fire until after, and it still blew my
There
socks
you
off
go.
because it's that good. So I did it. I nailed it.
There you go. Perfect.
Right?
Shad, feel free to disagree. This is a choice, Kyle, and you and I will talk about this at length, but I can't talk about that on a love bomb.
Amazing.
Yeah, Evie Bullion. Oh God, it's such a nice way to say Evie Bullion nag me. I think she's listening to the spear cuts through water part. Wheel of Time is not for Theo, I don't think. Honestly, I don't think you will really love it either. Also, because here's the thing. Epic fantasy is epic in many ways, right? Because of the scope, how long it is, yada, yada, yada.
Mhm.
One of the things that I will give credit to John Gwynne for is that he wrote an epic fantasy and it's 4 books. Like that to me is great
And they feel quick. They feel quick.
Right. Yeah. So I also started with A Song of Ice and Fire first. The thing with Wheel of Time is that it's so many books, and it probably should have been a 7-book series, in my opinion. And it's
So
that meandering problem.
Kyle is bullying me online. Everyone take note.
Kyle
But he's
bullies
not.
everybody. He's a real
But
bully, Kyle.
he is. But he's not wrong, and I love Kyle, and he knows that.
Don't
But
say
he's not,
that.
and
He's
he's not
wrong.
wrong.
Just say he's wrong. He's wrong. Kyle, you're wrong.
He's wrong a lot, but he's not wrong
Yes.
right now, because the reason
Okay.
why I haven't read that is because I know that I'm gonna feel like it's really long in parts, and I get a little bit not distracted. I just I kind of just want to keep things moving, and I
Mhm.
do get disinterested pretty quick. And I know that I'm gonna hit a spot in that series where I'm gonna be like, oh my god, like, is this really worth my time?
And you'll
Not
feel
a
that at
good.
the end of book 1.
Okay, it's not right.
Yeah.
It's not wrong. It's just a feeling, and I know
Yeah.
that's gonna happen. If it was a trilogy, I would have read it by now. Like,
Oh, yeah, for
it's
sure.
just it's such a commitment, and I have so much other amazing reads, that so many other books that I want to read, that I just can't justify going back for that journey right now
Mhm.
when I haven't read like other things, right? Anyway,
That's
it.
I totally
4
agree
was
with
too
that.
many.
Yeah, a 4 was too many. I agree. I read 3, and 3 felt like a lot. The
Yeah,
thing for me is that you're a plot-driven reader. That's what you've declared. I am a
I think
character-driven
so. Yeah,
reader. I'm very
yeah.
much a
Okay,
character-driven reader, which is why Joe Abercrombie works so well for me, because of the fact
I
that
have a
he
hot take. I didn't love First Law.
there
I
you
liked
go.
it,
And see, First
but I'm
Law
not a
is
super fan. Yeah.
one of my favorite trilogies of all
And I
time. I
totally get
love
it.
it.
And I actually
Yeah,
totally get it. And I'm kind of
and that's
jealous
the
that
thing.
it worked so well for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So for me, that he's kind of my author that I know if I pick up a book from him, I'm going to
Mhm.
enjoy it. It might not be my favorite take of what he's doing,
Mhm.
specifically with the standalones. I struggled a little bit with Red Country because it's a
I hear
Western
that.
setting,
Yeah. I hear
which
that.
just isn't my scene.
Yeah.
But even thinking about it retroactively, I think that book is substantially better than a lot of the other books that I've read. And I enjoyed it more than other books that I've read. It's just that compared to his other books, to
Yeah.
me, it's a weaker book. But he, for me, is a knockout every single
So
time for
here's
the
the
most
thing.
part.
So I read First Law a couple years ago now. And I listened to some of the audiobooks too with Stephen Pacey, who is like amazing.
Amazing. He's a
So good.
god, yes.
But I remember, and I've seen some comments about like, hey, what if Abercrombie finished A Song of Ice and Fire, like grimdark, whatever. Like I see that
Two
comparison,
different.
which is whatever. But at the same time, it's very interesting to me how A Song of Ice and Fire can work so well for me. And something like First Law, where the writing's really good, it's grimdark, the characters are amazing.
Mhm.
It was missing something. And the only thing I can point to is that in A Song of Ice and Fire, there's so much shit happening behind the
Yes.
scenes, in front of the,
Yes.
like, everywhere. Whereas First Law, I kind of had to like dig a little bit to figure out like, what is the
Mhm.
point, right?
I think you
Which
would
is the point.
probably
So I
do
don't know.
better with Age of Madness, because the way I
Okay.
like to describe First Law to Age of Madness is First Law is landing in Central Park and not knowing where you're going and just kind of wandering around for the day.
Mhm.
And you find statues along the way and you go, well, that's interesting. And you pause there for a little bit and then you move back on. Whereas
Yep.
Age of
Yep.
Madness is a marathon where you have a start and a finish, and it is a direct
I think I have the
line.
first book.
And
Is the
yeah, it's
first book called Age of No, it's not. Is it?
no, the first book is, I want to make sure I get it right, is A Little Hatred.
Yes. Okay.
But that one is very clear directionally, and it is a 3-book arc. So it is
Okay.
all working towards this one greater thing, even though there are independent plots happening within each of the books. But it is very intentional. And there's always the terminology. I think that it was actually originated by George R. R. Martin, this terminology that you have gardeners and architects. Gardeners are where
Oh,
we kind of work with things and we kind of just see how they grow, and that's how they're writing it, and it's not planned, whereas an architect is a very deliberate planner. And it's interesting
wow.
because Abercrombie is very clearly both, and in First Law he is a gardener, and Age of Madness he's an architect. And
Maybe I'll
it's
try that, because I was
yeah.
sad because he's such a good writer, and on like he should work for me. It's just that story.
Mhm.
I didn't really care that I read it. I was like, cool. Like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always
Yeah,
felt
Age of
like, did I
Madness.
miss something?
No, and
Is
that's
it
the thing,
me?
like, I tell people when I suggest, First Law to them, I'm like, "Hey, if you need very plot-heavy books, this is not the one for you, but if you want an enjoyable, funny read with character work, 10 out of
Oh,
10."
he's so funny. Yeah, he's so
Yes.
good. Okay,
Yes.
cool. Interesting. All right.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of The Blade itself, I had no idea what the plot was, but I still gave it 2 thumbs up. That's kind of how I felt, and
Yeah.
then when stuff started happening more in book 2, I was super excited because you didn't read beyond book 1, or you just read
I did.
book
I
1?
finished the trilogy. Yeah.
Okay, you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
The First Law
So I
trilogy. Yeah.
found in Before They Are Hanged that when they started exploring more of the world, you got more of that
Yeah.
epic
Yeah.
plot feel just because it was more world exploration. And I really enjoyed that. But I was in love with Galacta the second he appeared on the page. So for
Oh,
me,
he's
I was
I
hooked.
still think about those characters for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
totally.
so, so good.
It's just if
So
you take those characters and you put them into a plot that I care about,
yes.
then we're all good. Then we're all
I
good.
think you will really enjoy Age of Madness then. I still don't think it'll
Cool.
necessarily be your greatest book of all time, but I
Okay.
definitely think that you will come out of that appreciating Abercrombie significantly more.
Sweet. Cool.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right.
Yeah. I'm waiting now. I'm like, all right, great. I've influenced more Abercrombie and I'm just gonna sit
Yeah.
here and wait.
Yeah.
You'll have to tell me what you think about him and I will exchange my feelings on The Will of the Money and
100%.
that'll be what we
Maybe
go
if you
on from
decide
here.
to read like Canius, I'll read it along with you.
I actually really want to read it this year because my husband got me book 1 for Christmas last year.
Yep.
And I will say I was a little reluctant after I read Malice to jump into another
Yeah.
kind of epic fantasy type story.
Debut series as well.
Yes, debut as
Yeah.
well. So I
Yeah.
will say though, because of how much I'm enjoying Will of the Many, even though I've heard from a lot of people that this is much better than Lycanis for
It's
them.
better and it's different. It's written
Mhm.
different. It's a different perspective. It's you can tell his writing is better. It's
Mhm.
deliberately a different style as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I like both. I like
Mhm.
both. So I don't know.
I'm curious, honestly. I just want a good
Yeah.
story. You know, that's
Yeah.
all I really
Yeah.
want is a good story. What I've come to learn too is I don't want to be angry when I'm reading because it really does affect my mood externally when I close the book. If I'm super amped in a negative way from what I've read, I have to distance myself and remind myself that I'm reading for fun.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I don't necessarily need to be provoked in that way.
Fair
I think with
enough. Fair
certain
enough.
things, it's good because if it's a challenging read, that it's maybe having you question the way that you live your life, your beliefs, like all of that kind of stuff, it can be very beneficial. But if it's more so just from the perspective where I'm legitimately not enjoying a book, I really struggle with DNFing still. So I'm trying to give myself more permission to do things like that so I can just consistently enjoy what I'm reading.
I'm still afraid. I'm still afraid to DNF too. So I find
Mhm.
myself just like putting a pin in stuff. So that's why I have a couple books where I'm like halfway through.
Yeah,
I don't know. Do I DNF them? Like at what point do I
I
go,
know.
I don't know if I want to continue this?
That's the thing.
Um
And sometimes the mood just isn't right, or it's a not for now. That's what I like to call them, is not
yeah.
for nows, where I know. So this is interesting because in your video, you were talking that you were going to read Cersei, which I love. I
Yeah.
freaking
Where is it?
love Cersei.
Somewhere. Yeah.
Yes. The opening line to that book is one of my all time favorites. I freaking love
Really?
it. Yeah, it is incredible.
Let me look up. I think it's
You
my
have
other
it?
one. All right. No, it's in the where is it?
Where is
Oh,
my
it's right here.
copy now? I'm trying to figure out where it's been. Oh, it's on my top shelf.
Okay, I got
Do
it.
you have it? Yeah. Read the first line. First line.
How could a first line be so good? I don't
It's
understand.
so good.
Whoa. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's a great first line.
Hey, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
If people
All
are
right.
interested, the line, I think I'm paraphrasing, but when I was
I
born,
can read it. Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was born, the name for what I was did not exist.
Yeah. It's an
Crazy.
excellent
You're
first
like,
line.
wait, what?
Yeah.
And
I
if you
love it.
kind of
I
know what it
love it.
is, it's intriguing at that point because you're like,
Yes.
okay. Yeah.
Yes. And it just makes perfect sense, honestly, for the overall theme vibe of that book. But
Cool.
that book is such a good
So
vibe.
did you read Song of Achilles? Sorry,
I
I
haven't
missed
read it
it.
yet. So I have read I read Circe first, and then I read her
Okay.
short story of Galatia, and I still need to read Song of Achilles. I haven't been in the mood for it. I haven't been in the mood for it. So that's been the whole
So
thing.
I've put this off because Song of Achilles worked for me in at a time when like I didn't expect to love that book, but I did. I'm a little bit sick, so forgive me. But
No, you're fine.
this one I put off because I'm like, is it going to be a little bit more of the same? I don't want to compare them. I don't want to go in being like, you know, I loved this book. I'm expecting to like this one.
Yeah.
So it's been long enough, and now I'm craving something by her again because she just writes beautifully, and I loved it.
She is. Oh,
So
her prose are gorgeous. I love her
she's
prose.
so
Derek,
good.
that is
Do
a
you say
phenomenal one.
do you say prose plural? Because I got made fun
Prose.
of one time for saying that.
What do you
Is it
mean?
prose like is it prose is or is it prose are?
I think her prose are.
Like plural, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I get made fun of sometimes when I say that, and so I just conform to what society wants from me.
Joanna is
Sometimes.
saying prose is, but I don't
I've heard
know.
it both. I've heard it both ways, and I was like, "Is it?"
Saying no,
Okay,
it's not
maybe
plural,
that's
but
why. I
I don't
trust
know.
Joanna.
Prose is okay.
Okay,
Apparently we're being corrected here.
I'm
Here's the
sorry to
thing.
draw attention to that.
I consistently am thinking in two languages, so I don't know.
Yes. Okay.
So for me, I was saying earlier tonight in terms of when I write, my grammar is terrible because I confuse French and English and then I get them both wrong.
That's so funny. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
so it ends up being this like weird thing in my brain. Yes, one day we'll start reading that. Evie, was actually going to message you about starting that in September because next month
So
is O1.
I'm curious about that translation because I actually have like a Folio Society. Is it?
Is it
Yeah,
Folio?
Folio Society.
Yeah.
It's not Folio Society. I have the Greek myths that's Folio.
Okay.
And then I have this random one that's the Iliad and the Odyssey, like a nice leather bind up that's similar to the Folio, and they look nice together. That's why I have them together. But I can't remember where I got it from. I'm just wondering, like, is that the right? Because I read them when I was younger, obviously, like prescribed
Yeah.
Greek boy reading. But I haven't read them in forever, and I want to read them again. And actually, Madison wanted to read the Odyssey, and I just don't know if there's like a specific version of it that I should seek.
I think that Emily Wilson is okay. So historically, the translations have all been a focus on the story as a whole. And Emily Wilson's is a focus on the prose. And the prose is, guys, there you're welcome.
The prose be.
The prose be very important. And I think that that's been one of the big things that's been missing in a lot of translations up until this point. The two main ones specifically for the Iliad, I think they're pretty common as well for the Odyssey, is Fitzgerald and Fagles. And when you hear the descriptors in the Greek versus what it becomes or it became in the English in these translations, you kind of sit there and you go, this feels a little lackluster for what this story is trying to convey. And I feel like Emily Wilson has gone in to that descriptor level and has given that to people.
That's a good explanation.
So I think, I think it's a very different approach in that one is more academic in its nature and one is more story in its nature. And I think hers is more story.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you read the Odyssey before? It sounds like
I have many times.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
many times.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I love the Odyssey. Between that and the Iliad, I will take the Odyssey every time.
Okay.
Yeah. But the Iliad is still great if people haven't read it because you should read one and then you read the other. That's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Right?
Even though they can be read independent of each other, it's just, I think, more interesting when you have the background of the things that are being referenced and characters specifically that are being referenced in the Odyssey.
Right.
Because the impact of certain scenes is much greater if you have read the Iliad.
Sweet. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
I have recommendations though for Greek. Yeah.
What's that?
I have recommendations though for Greek mythology. I made a video not that long ago about where to start with ancient Greek literature, and I mentioned where like all the stuff you should start with specifically for myth.
Okay, I'm writing it down.
There we
Okay, perfect. Watch
go.
Laura's videos.
Specific videos.
Nailed
You
it.
don't have to watch all of them. But yeah, I keep telling everybody, and that's the thing I will argue until the end of time, that fantasy has existed for thousands of years, and we started getting fantasy with these ancient epics like Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then of course all the epics that haven't survived into modernity. But the stories themselves are so good.
Correct me if you disagree.
Okay.
But I feel like there's, or at least there has been in the past, a stigma for fantasy and fantasy readers. At what point did that shift? Because back in the day, we would all want to sit down around the storyteller and hear these stories, right? There was nothing else to do. And then all of a sudden, real literature came along and people got educated in academia and whatever. And then we're like, oh, you're reading a story about like magic, right?
Yes.
At what point did that shift? And have we seen a bit of a resurgence or a bit of a change in respect for literature and fiction and fantasy specifically? Like, what's going on?
So
is it cool to like fantasy now? I don't know.
I know, right? I was talking
Are
to
we still
Joanna
weird?
about this last year because of the fact that I feel over time we have ascribed certain genres to different levels of intelligence. And I feel like when someone says, my degree is in literature, people look at them and they go, oh, like you probably studied Austen, and, you know, we can talk about philosophy like Foucault, or we can talk about Proust, you know, and most people would look at that and go, who are these people? Like, what? I've never even heard of Proust, you know? Whereas if you then respond with, but have you read A Song of Ice and Fire? And they look at you and go,
they'll say, that's the Game of Thrones book, right?
Right. Yeah. And there's an immediate degradation of looking down upon that thing. Whereas opposed to if someone says, I'm very familiar with the Iliad and the Odyssey, where we immediately ascribe them with, oh, this person is probably more educated, you know, has a higher, you know, degree. And I think it is so ludicrous because reading is reading and it's an immersive experience, hopefully, no matter what you are reading. I think that what matters more than anything else is what are you learning from that experience? And I feel like fantasy, more often than not, people like to say, well, it's not real life. There's nothing about fantasy that's real life, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Even though the situations in the world are different, the reactions that people have are inherently the same. Like
I had that conversation with my wife and she's like, well, I don't really like fantasy. Like she's like, well, tell me, we were on a long drive and she's like, tell me what you like about fantasy. Like what, I don't get it. And I tried to explain that like thematically and even, you know, when you look at the writing and the character work and all that, like there's so much that transcends genders and stuff, or genres, probably genders too. But definitely genres. And like it, sometimes unless you're told that the place you're in is fictitious,
you wouldn't know.
Sometimes you wouldn't know. And I sort of said in A Song of Ice and Fire, like it could just be a real historical book. And quite frankly, it's based on a lot of real events. So like the fact that there's a dragon in it and the fact that the name of the continent is whatever, like that's really all that makes it fantasy. And so I tried to explain there's different levels of fantastical within a book, right? And she likes, so one of her favorite series, and one thing we kind of bonded over when we were younger, because we met in high school, was Harry Potter. And she read it from when she was very, very young. She loves Harry Potter. And we watch the movies like once a year and read the books, right? And she was trying to explain that because that's set in a real world and it's really like urban fantasy, she can sort of suspend disbelief a little bit and say, okay, like it's just magic, like in London, like cool. To me, that's more fantasy than some of the fantasy books I read. So I don't really understand. Yeah. And it's interesting what people perceive that way and what works for some people or doesn't work for some people or whatever.
Definitely.
I don't know.
Yeah. I just had a conversation with Kyle and John Minton on his channel about Oathbringer last week. And I was saying this in specifically the context of Stormlight Archive and the familial dynamics that we see in that book as to how Dalinar is a man that is crippling himself with dealing with the death of his brother. He's been an absent father to now 2 adult sons that he doesn't quite know how to interact with, relate to, be a father figure to. And I sat back and I thought, who doesn't know someone like that?
Yeah.
Who doesn't
It's
know
very
someone that is
relatable.
right? Like struggling with a relationship with a parent, with a sibling, with a step parent, like all of that stuff. It's just, there's so many things where I look at aspects of fantasy worlds and plots and I go, that's something I deal with on a
Yep.
daily basis. Like, is the main character dealing with anxiety? Is
I
the
am.
I
Yeah,
am
yeah,
is the
yeah,
main character super scattered and like doesn't know how to react to a situation?
yeah.
Sure do.
And you know what's funny? As we become better readers and more versed in the genre and all that stuff, a criticism that comes up a lot is, oh, these characters are one-dimensional. Oh, they're Mary Sue's, Gary Stu's. Oh, they can't do
Mhm.
anything wrong. Oh, there's no depth to the what. Like, once you start at now that we start looking for that and we want more realistic representation and relatability in characters
Yeah.
and all that stuff, it really does then transcend the genre, right? Because like unless you're told
Mhm.
it's fantasy or unless you get those snippets, it like I'm in the middle of Ship of Destiny as well. Derry's gonna hate me for not having finished it yet because it's been a while. Um, what a beautiful, like, I'll say Robin Hobb isn't 100% for me. I
Mhm.
find myself taking a little longer to finish her books than I would if I was like
Sure.
super into it. But
Yeah.
beautiful books, beautiful stories. Live Ship Traders is amazing. And like, what a family drama. Yeah, there's a
Mhm.
sentient kind of ship for a reason. Fantasy for sure. But like, really, 90% of when you're reading it, it's just beautiful family
Sure.
drama, basically. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's very interesting. And if it didn't have that, it would be not great, right? The fantasy
Yeah.
doesn't make up for it, right?
No, not at all. I feel
So,
very similarly. I haven't read Hobb yet. I am reluctant to read Hobb. I'm so sorry, Derry, because I have a feeling I'm going to struggle deeply
yeah.
with Hobb.
I don't think you
um,
will. If you're a character
it's the
reader and
animal
you
stuff.
liked,
It's the animal stuff for me that's really going to bother me. Like I
you
struggle
like
deeply
in
when
Farseer, you mean?
yeah,
Like Animal
like
Companion.
not animal companion, but like when sad things happen with animals. Like I don't
Okay.
do well with
Yeah.
sad animal stuff.
Okay. Well, Derry could
So
speak to it more, but so far I haven't
yeah.
been hit in the gut too much on the animal front because I'm a little bit sensitive to that too.
Mhm.
Um, I might be missing something, but I don't really remember too much. But
I don't
probably
know.
there's probably a lot more. I've
I don't
read
know.
5 books,
Either
so
way,
yeah.
but it's one of those things that if we look at Fitz, for example, and he
Okay.
has these companions, like how is that not
Inevitably,
really?
what will happen? Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just it's one of these things I feel like, and I was talking to Philip Chase about it earlier this year, and he was saying to me that he felt that reading Hobb helped him grieve with the passing of his dog. And it's like
Wow.
you
Oh
can
man.
read fantasy and apply it to all these different facets of your life and not even really be cognizant of that happening while you're reading it, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So I read a book, and this is not great. This is not a great comparison, but because it's not really fantasy, but like it kind of is. But I read A Monster Calls. Do you remember? Do you know that book or
I've
that
heard of
movie?
it. I have not read it.
Okay, so it's basically this kid and his mom is dying,
Okay.
and he um, imagines basically, we think, that this tree in his backyard is like talking to him, and there's a bunch of
Yes.
stuff that happens, and it's
Yes.
basically written very much like a fictitious, like fantasy, imaginative from the point of view of a child's story. Okay, but there's a lot
Mhm.
more depth to it, some existentialism and trauma and grief and all that stuff. And I picked it up for some reason when we found out my mom had cancer for the second time.
Mhm.
And I almost put it down because I was like, there's no way that I can read this book. But it was done so well and
Yep.
it was handled with so much care. And it was actually quite a beautiful book. And it actually helped me come to terms with she's actually okay now, luckily, but like she's not, we're, it's still there and we're just dealing with that, but it could have been a
Right.
lot worse. and at the time we didn't know which course this would take. And it helped me kind of just come to terms with the fact that either way that it goes, there's a way to handle it. And
Yeah, for
there
sure.
are mechanisms with which to cope. And
Mhm.
that was the important thing for me to like remember, is like, you know, how would this play out, and
Mhm.
what things are most important, and how would I
Yeah.
deal with this, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, not to get too deep, but yeah, it
No,
really like it
honestly though,
helped me a lot,
I
that book. I'm
exactly. I love that type
Yeah.
of thing. And honestly, I will feel that because I write. So that for me becomes a big motivator for writing too. If I'm dealing with something really heavy and I think, how can I maybe put that contextually into something that is otherworldly, but
Yeah.
simultaneously we experience? And
Yeah.
it's a, you know, transcendent thing where it doesn't really matter what world you live in. This is something that we're
Yeah.
all at some point going to encounter.
I
And
I always
yeah.
romanticized reading, like writing.
Mhm.
I like writing. I'd like to think I'm an okay writer, but I don't think
Sure.
I could write fiction. I don't think I could write a book. Okay, I can
Okay.
write like a letter very nicely, but I don't think I'm capable of writing. But um, the thing that I would struggle with, I feel like I could spin a good story, but
Mhm.
that's what I would struggle with, is tying in the human experience, right, into the
I
work,
I
and
think it
making
comes
it
more
sort of
naturally than you
feel.
think.
You
Honestly,
might be
I think
right. You might be
it
right.
I
It
so one of the things I like to
I've never
tell my
tried,
husband,
so
here's the thing, you do have to try, but my
yeah.
husband struggled with that a little bit at first with trying to figure out his character in a story, and
Yeah.
I always like to tell people, create a dating profile for a
Mm,
character in your book because it will give
interesting.
you the breakdown of who they present themselves as, and then write one from the perspective of knowing them. And it's
Okay.
like, okay, outwardly, this is what they're portraying. Inwardly, this is who they are. And I really love doing that. But like, I
Hmm.
I came up with this book idea a few months ago. I have only written the first few chapters. I really want to finish writing it, but the book opens with my main character realizing that she's died, and she died by being bored to death at a dinner party by the conversation at the table that was happening next to her. And she ends up in
I
this
feel like that's
place,
happened to me before, but
right?
anyway. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She has ended up in this place called the Holding Bay, where she gets a number called 3A, and she realizes that A stands for average because she lived a really average life, which she thinks is probably good because if she's going to the beyond, it's better to have been
Right.
average than to have been terrible. And she
Yeah.
finds out as she's in this line that every person who has lived and died will have to live out a genre of a book. And if you're average, you get the choice of living out a mystery or a fantasy. And my character hates fantasy and decides she wants to live out a mystery novel. And of course, is terrible with directions. And she finds out that she ends up in the fantasy world. And the whole thing is within this is that it's a journey of figuring out all the mistakes of what you didn't accomplish while you were alive and being able to live them out as yourself, but also as playing somebody else, you know? And it's like you can take these ideas and you can put them into these weird situations that you go, I'm never going to be in that situation because
Right.
that's not going to
Right.
happen to me. But
But how would
I,
that play out? Yeah.
but how would that play out for me?
Have
You
you
know?
told anyone
And
about this?
this is my first time telling people. So there
Well,
you
that's
go.
that actually sounds awesome. Darius like,
I think it's gonna
yeah,
be really
like
fun, honestly. Like
I'd
it's
read
gonna be
that.
a satirical thing, but I think it's gonna be really fun. So I'm looking forward to writing it because I've been working on
Cool.
my big book, and I need little breaks in the midst of that because
Yep.
it's much bigger. And this is
Yep.
a standalone, which I think we really do need more standalones in fantasy.
100%. 100%. I
Right?
find myself gravitating to some shorter books lately, even
Yeah.
shorter series. I'm trying to slot
Hmm.
those in and build some momentum. I'm reading a little more and a little bit faster than I have in a long time. And
Sure.
part of that is due to just reading more that I'm enjoying and getting through smaller books faster, and
Hmm.
knowing that the long journeys are there for when I want to do them.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I It's funny because whenever you see these lists and stuff and questions and people go short books, long books, series or standalone, and I'm like, all of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever the mood is
Depends on the
dictating at
day,
that
like,
time.
which is like I
Exactly.
said, sometimes that's the problem. I
Mhm.
envy people that can go, that is a really long book. There are 3 of them. I'm starting it, and if I enjoy it, I'm just gonna run right through it. And even if
That's
do you know
me.
how many book ones I've started that I adored and just was like, I'll get back to the rest of them? Like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with me? I
I'm a
don't know.
binger. I have the opposite problem that I will have my other books
I
waiting, and I come
can't.
across a book one and I'm like, "Oh, I'm in," and I do the
Oh, I can't.
whole
I
series. Yeah.
so Lies of Loch Lamora, one of the
Mhm.
best first books I've ever read. I
I've still
loved it. I
only
thought it
read
was a
book 1 for that.
masterpiece.
Yep.
Okay, I thought it was a masterpiece. I couldn't believe I liked it so much. I may have just
Yeah,
read
it
it
was
at the
good.
right time or whatever as well. I was
Mhm.
like, this is so refreshing. This is so exactly what I wanted at the time. I
Mhm.
have both books. Literally, I have the other 2 behind me. Like, I don't
Yeah.
understand why I haven't continued. Maybe
Right?
because I'm like, they're there. Like, I don't need,
Yeah.
otherwise, if I finish them, they will no longer be there. But like, they
That's
still will
true.
be. I
That
don't know.
is true. For me, the thing with Locke specifically is that it felt very episodic and it felt conclusive in that I
It
knew that
sort
they
of
were
did.
yeah, it
Yes.
felt like they were going on another adventure fine, but it wasn't urgent. I didn't
True.
need to know what was happening, whereas something like a
Okay. Like
Stormlight
Hamia's.
Archive,
You finish book 1 and tell me that you can just like hang around and not read book 2
I
right
will
away. Like,
probably
good
binge
luck
the
for
whole
that.
thing. If I like it, I
Yeah.
will definitely binge it. That's why I
Yeah.
read all of the Cosmere last year because I needed to
Yeah.
know everything that was happening. Yeah, I did the same with Gentleman Masters. Yeah, exactly. I feel like that it works well for that. My husband did the opposite. He binged Loch Lamora because he loved it. It's
Okay.
now one of his favorite series of all time.
I
But
can I can see that.
yeah,
Part of
it's
it
fun.
may have been because subconsciously I know they're not finished.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if I
I
finish the
struggle with
first
that
3,
too.
I don't know. Where do I
I
go from
struggle
there?
with that.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When that's been my whole thing. For specifically for Loch Lamora, it's the reason I haven't started any of the Patrick Rothfuss books because I'm like they're not done, and I'm like
I
I
get
would
it. I
rather
get it.
know I have a conclusion waiting for me,
True.
even though that's not to
So
say that the journey isn't
the
worth it with the other
the
books.
will of the many. Good luck with that.
I
You're gonna be
know,
pulling your hair out like,
I
where's the
know,
next
and
book? Yeah.
I know. And that's the thing. I was willing to take this jump because so many people have read it and have
Yeah.
said it is incredible. And I cannot wait for everyone to read it. And I was like, you know what? I'm in.
This was one of the few times where I'm glad I read a kind of new release. I was late to the party on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But I read it, a little while ago, and I'm happy that I did. I'm
Mm-hmm.
bummed because it's going to be a while for the next book, I think. But I'm like,
Yeah.
you know what? If I just keep putting off all these brand new books for brand new series,
Mm-hmm.
like there's a place for that to await, right? The next installment with everybody else and still,
Yeah.
I don't know. If I just waited for everything to be completed, I think I'd fall so far behind.
I think
You know what I
that's
mean?
kind of the case. And it's interesting too, because I had taken off so many years of reading fantasy that I came back and there were so many new
Oh my God.
names in the
It's
genre that I
crazy.
hadn't heard of when I stopped reading. And I had a plethora of choices to go through, which has
I
been
was
really
off,
wonderful.
dude. I was off BookTube for a little bit. I came back and now there's book
I
2
know.
of this series, book 3 of that series. This one's done. This
Yep.
one's new. Blah blah blah. Author, same book,
Yeah.
like new book, new series. Like, I, it's too
It's
much. I
wild.
need
It's
2 of
wild. I
me.
mean,
Yeah.
I know. When you see people who I appreciate so much, when people do the videos telling you what all the new releases are going to be in the following month, it always astounds me how many there are just in fantasy and sci-fi. And I think I would read a bunch of these. How many am I going to read? Maybe one. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you get FOMO, or do you feel good knowing that there's so many options? Like, I
I get
get some
FOMO.
severe FOMO
I
sometimes. I'm
get
like, oh
FOMO.
my
Yeah.
God.
And the thing
Yeah.
is that growing up, I was all about a hype train, right? I always
Okay.
loved to see what people were getting excited about and just go, I know what they're talking about. And I would immediately go read that thing or watch it. So I was
Yeah.
able to be part of the conversation. And with reading, I feel like I really fell out of that. So
Hmm.
coming back into this has been a really interesting experience where it was, okay, what is the Cosmere? I don't know. I'm going to read that. I mean, I had read A Song of Ice and Fire, so I felt like I had a foot in that
Yeah,
fandom, which is
totally.
fine.
You have a
But,
great foot in that. You love that. Like, you know
yeah, I
so
do,
much about it.
you know?
It's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was one of those things that I didn't know anything of Brandon Sanderson. I didn't know anything of First Law. I hadn't read any Romantasy at all, which has, I think, like the biggest hype train of all time since Book Talk's whole thing. And this year I sat back because I was part of this, I'm going to call it problem, because I think it is a
Okay.
problem. And it comes back to what we were saying earlier in terms of ascribing intelligence to genres, types of books, and so on and so forth. And I really looked down
Oh,
on
what did you
Romantasy.
do? Yeah,
I looked down
exactly.
on
I do
Romantasy
too.
big time. And
Yeah.
I said, you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to read some of this and see if this is still my opinion when I get to the end of it. And I felt I was wrong, and I own that
What did you
completely.
read? What
I
made
read
you
Fourth
feel that
Wing,
way?
I read Fourth
Okay.
Wing, and I read ACOTAR, all of
Akatar.
ACOTAR.
So
And yeah.
okay. So me and my wife and I, so one of her best friends, I
Mhm.
look up to her a lot. She's now a wife and a mother and a successful accountant. And like, just I respect her, and I know she's very educated, and I know she reads a little bit of everything. And she recently started reading Romantasy, and she's very like, kind
Mhm.
of like, it's her guilty pleasure. She
Yeah.
blitzed through ACOTAR. She read Fourth Wing and the next book, and she's like, "Oh my God, I love this stuff."
It's
And
great.
I'm trying to understand why. Now,
Yep.
it still may not be my demographic, and I
It
may
might not.
still not see the spark that you do, but
Mhm.
I'm so curious about it because
I
I
love
just
it.
don't, I'd like to understand it. And here's the thing.
Okay.
I used to think maybe I don't like romance. Maybe
Mhm.
I don't like X, Y, and Z. I've come to find that with those things in the right book, I love it.
Yeah, same here. And I felt the same way
Right.
as you. I was like, I just don't like this in my books. Not true.
So here's the thing. I DNF'd Outlander, which should
Fair.
have worked for me on paper because it's historical
Mhm.
fantasy, I guess you could
Yeah,
say.
it is.
It's written brilliantly.
It is.
It's a nice series. Like I liked everything about it, the setting,
Mhm.
whatever. It got a little too gratuitous with some of the
Yeah.
scenes and the motivations. I was like, I disagree with this,
Yeah.
what's happening right now. So it put me off a little bit. And I understand why. I just can't
Mhm.
understand, or I can't imagine why I'd be turned off of the general subgenre of romantasy.
Sure.
Like maybe some of it. What is the best in that genre? Is it ACOTAR? Like if I wanted to start, what would I read?
So I think it depends on what your expectations are, because
Okay.
I think that there's a few different ways to
Okay.
go about it. And this is kind of what I try to tell people. We've lumped so much into romantasy, and it's not all
Totally.
really that way,
Okay.
because there are the fantasy forward books with romance, and then there are the romance forward books with fantasy.
Right.
So Sarah J. Maas, for example, has her ACOTAR series, which
Even
of her series is my favorite. And
okay.
that is romance forward with fantasy. Her Throne of Glass series, which is her 8-book like magnum opus, is
Hmm.
fantasy forward very much with romance. And
Okay.
it depends if you, the way I kind of describe it is that it's popcorn for my brain. Like I go into it knowing I'm not going into this for something like a Guy Gabriel Kay, where I'm
Yeah.
wanting
Right. Right.
evocative prose that are gonna, move me. I am best is subjective.
I know.
I am not going into it with the expectation that this is gonna be like the greatest thing that I've ever read. I'm going into it the
Okay.
same way that I would go into watching a
Okay.
rom-com or like a hyped up movie,
And I love rom-coms. Like
Then you will
I
love this.
love popcorn
You will
movies. I love.
then you will love ACOTAR. It's
And
great.
here's the thing. Have you read Never yeah, Derry's talking about Jacob Kristoff. Have you read Nevernight?
It's on my list. I'm wanting to read it in the next few months.
So I loved that trilogy actually. I actually
Okay.
liked it way more than I thought I would. And it's
Okay.
like pretty smutty,
Yeah. So here's the
if I'm
thing.
being totally honest. And I'm like, it's okay because it was very
Mhm.
fantasy forward, and everything that
Yeah.
I like in my fantasy was done pretty well. And I think
Mhm.
um pretty it's pretty like innovative magic
Mhm.
systems and the world and the setting. It was a little bit not unique, I would say. And there was just some smut sprinkles everywhere. And I was like, I'm down, like whatever,
So
you
here's
know?
the thing with the smut
Okay.
classification that really actually bothers me,
Okay.
specifically for Akatar.
Okay.
Akatar has the math has legitimately been done for this because people were getting so annoyed of people just saying, "Oh, you're reading fairy smut."
It's got it.
There is a breakdown of the number of pages in that series, and then people broke it down per book and the number of sexy scenes per book. It is no more than 5% of the book.
Really?
5%. And I'm like, if that's what
I
y'all are thinking is smut, it's not. So, yeah.
You're right. So I guess there can be scenes, but if you start to classify it that way, it's
Yes.
doing it an
A
injustice because
disservice.
it's not
Yeah.
really a
Because it's
yeah,
not that.
exactly.
No.
Yeah.
So the
Okay.
first Akatar book is really a Beauty and the Beast retelling. No. It's a
But
Beauty
wait,
and the
there's
Beast
more.
retelling.
Yeah. Okay.
But book 2 is when I find it becomes more of a fantasy focused storyline. And it was interesting to kind of see how she wove things from book 1 into her later books. I really enjoyed it. So I
Okay.
think based on what you have said, there's a good chance you might like Akatar. I will say the first book
Okay.
for me is the weakest because it does have more of that fairy tale vibe and less of the fantasy vibe that I was wanting, but that really amps up in book 2. And
Okay.
one of the things that I actually, and I've praised her for doing this many times on my channel, so this isn't new. I think Sarah J. Maas writes trauma exceptionally well. And that trauma.
Okay.
And that is something that people don't expect to read in that series because they're just like, oh, well, it's a smutty fairy book. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
it's not. And books 2 and books 5 both deal with very serious trauma, specifically book 5. Book 5 made me
Okay.
cry. And I'm not a crier when I read.
Really?
I've cried twice in the last decade from reading. And one of those was from her book. So, yeah.
Without spoiling it, can you give me an idea as to what that theme was or what that topic was that moved you so much?
It is sexual violence.
Okay.
Yeah. And it is the explaining of an experience to a group of females. So, yeah.
Interesting. And that was done well.
Beautifully.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think this is not necessarily related anymore, although trauma plays a role. I think you're going to like Nevernight.
Yeah, I think so too. Based on the reading of the little bit I've done of researching that, because I also want to do his Vampire Empire, or whatever it's called.
I read Empire of the Vampire, but I haven't read Empire of the Damned yet, and it's somewhere up there. I want to reread. Here's the thing. I've started to want to reread books now before the new one comes out or whatever. And I'm like,
so good.
When do I make time for that? Right. So I actually said, I'm not going to read Empire of the Damned. I'm going to, when there's a release date of the next one, or even just for fun, I'm going to reread Empire of the Vampire and then read the next one.
This is hilarious.
Yes,
A Court of Thorns and Roses. Read Empire, or it's fabulous. Yeah, I'm really jazzed to read it. I've never read anything by him, so, and that's been one of the other things is I'm giving myself this year permission to reread things, which I haven't done before.
Oh,
because
this is a booktube thing. When I was on booktube a little bit more, I was like, how dare I reread something and not have new content to talk about?
New things
no one wants to know that I reread Malice for the 7th time.
Exactly, right?
But the heart wants what the heart wants. Okay?
It does.
It's my channel, and I'm going to do it the way I want. Yeah.
And this is how I've been feeling. Like this month, I reread Akatar for the 4th time this year.
You did not. You didn't.
I did. This month I did. I just reread it at the beginning of the month. And I reread a couple of Emily Henry books that I read a few months ago because I was like, you know what? I want to read. And I want to read something that I know is going to give me joy when I need it. Because for me, that's what it is.
You know what I would reread like tomorrow? I would reread The Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell.
Oh my God.
I would pick that shit up tomorrow.
I would reread it too.
but I
Oh,
want to give myself a little bit more time. But then I'm like,
oh,
why? I know I'm going to enjoy it just as much, if not.
and
What
that's
a
how I feel
brilliant.
now.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I feel now. It was one of those things, and I talked about this earlier this year with Carlos and Yolanda from StoryTube, and that when I was in high school, I had an English teacher that we had reading time every day before. It
Sweet.
was like
Wow.
his way to kind of like ease us into the period, and
Yeah.
we'd have like
It's
10 to 15
meditative,
minutes of
right? Yeah.
reading. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we'd get going with our class. And I brought The Prisoner of Azkaban for the whole year. I kept
Damn
rereading
right.
it. Like I just kept rereading it, and I would find something new every
Yeah.
single time I read it. And I sat there and I
Why
thought,
why that book? At the
"Oh, it's
time,
my
was it the one that
favorite."
was out?
Oh no,
It's
they
on
were
my
many
list.
of them were out. Yeah,
That's the book that it starts to pop off. Best characters.
exactly. It
That's where
is
it turned for
so
me. And I'm
good.
like, yeah. So that
Exactly.
book's on my list for the feeling that I got and what
Yes,
it did to me as a reader.
exactly.
Yeah,
It's a
it was so good.
vibe. That book is
Such a
a
vibe.
vibe. And
You and I
I
overlap so much.
I know. It's great, right?
This is
You should
amazing.
reread Warlord. We should both reread Warlord.
I can't wait for the next time you call me and you go, yo, there's a book you're going to like. I'm going to trust you and I
There
am
you
going to read
go,
it
right?
immediately. I'm
Cersei.
waiting.
That's gonna be Cersei for you. It's
Okay.
gonna be so
That's the
good.
next book I'll read.
There you
Yeah.
go. It's gonna be
Sounds
amazing.
good.
But so my whole thing this year was I sat back and I thought about it and I was like, I'm tired of this like booktube guilt that no one is giving to me except myself. In that I
Yeah.
feel
Right.
like I
No one
need to
cares.
have new content. Like
Yeah.
literally no one cares. you know?
Yeah.
And I think part of what people actually really enjoy is when creators almost say, hey,
Yep.
reminder, feel free to read whatever you want to read. Like,
Yep.
feel
Yeah.
free to reread things if that's what you are feeling is going to benefit you in that moment. Like, struggling to read something that you don't necessarily connect with just because other people are reading it doesn't have to work for you.
I've been through that. I've struggled through some books where I'm like, my peer group and people that I adore and trust love
Yep.
this. And they
Yep.
really want me to enjoy it. I don't see this happening.
That was you with
What?
Lions. That was you with
Oh
Lions of
man,
Our Yeah.
I bailed on, and I feel like if I give it the right time, like I feel
You
like I
will like
will
that
like
book.
GGK.
You will.
But in that moment, and it also happened with Shogun, I literally led a Shogun read along and I bailed on it. And I'm like, guys, I can't. And everyone loved it. And I'm like, I
Uh-huh.
can't. I'm not. The first chapter, like it pops off and I wasn't in the mood. And I
Mhm.
didn't know until like, that's the thing. When you plan too far ahead, I'm
Yeah, it's
so much
hard.
a mood reader. It's terrible, Laura. And like,
Yep.
if I plan next month a series or a book, like I
Yeah.
might not want to read it at that time.
Exactly.
It is the way it is. So
This has been the hardest thing for me since starting the Patreon and
this
doing
is
the book club
therapy
where
for
I'm
me. I'm so happy you've had
committed.
me on
I
today.
know,
Yeah.
right? And I'm
It's
like
so good.
committed to this book. And I was telling Josh earlier that we're going to be reading our book for next month. I'll announce it on
Okay.
Sunday. I'm going to
Okay.
start it really early in case I'm not jiving
Yeah.
with it. So it gives me the
Amazing.
whole month to get through it. But
Amazing.
this is the thing though, like I finished a couple of books last month. Malice was one of them. And I just felt like deprived of happiness while reading. I was like, I'm not connecting with anything. What do I know I love? And that's just going to be easy for me that I can just immerse myself in and not have an expectation that I need to glean something from what I'm reading. Because I feel like that for me is a lot of the time the problem, right? When you come across a new book, a new author, a new series, a new world, you go, what is this going to give me that I don't have already as a reader? What's new about this that I'm yearning for? And sometimes I think we need to step back from that and go, what's familiar? And what do I already have that connection to? And
Why
it's
fight?
so
You
good.
like what you like. Why fight it, right? And
Exactly.
the solution to that is to every now and then to suffer through a bad book, but then you just read Akatar after it, and
And then you feel
just
great.
bounce
You
between them.
feel great, guys.
Fixed.
Honestly,
Problem
though, like
solved.
the second I finished Warlord, which was almost like a religious experience for me reading that trilogy. It's my favorite trilogy of all time now. I freaking love it. It's incredible.
I think it's
Oh,
mine too. I think it's mine too.
so
Because
good.
in my video, in
Oh,
my top 10, I was like, this has got to be like one of my top 3, whatever. And then I was thinking in my head, as I'm saying it, what other trilogies are better?
it's better.
What other
Exactly.
ones do I like more?
Yep. The
I don't have an
only
answer.
one for me is First Law. Like for me, it's First Law, and
It's not for me. So
no, it's not for you, but for me it is.
there you go.
And
Okay.
the second I finished Excalibur, though, I looked at Josh and I was like, I just want to reread this. Like I don't
Yeah.
even want to read
Yeah.
anything else. I just want to reread this.
Yeah. When I
And, like,
reread when I read Storm of Swords, I didn't want to. I wanted to go back to Game of Thrones and just read through again.
right? I know. Like that's the thing. There are so few of those series. I feel like there have been a few in my life. The first one I ever had that with was Harry Potter, because for me, I'm not going to make you like drop your age live on the internet, but for me, I was the appropriate age for. I grew up with Harry, Hermione, and Ron.
Okay. So here's what happened with me. So I'm 37, which is
okay.
disgusting to say out loud, but it's the truth. I got gifted this book in grade 5 or 6, and I sat on it for a couple years and picked it up, I think in grade 9 or 10, probably because I had a crush on my wife and she was a Harry Potter nerd. And I was like, I gotta see what this is all about. And I picked it up a couple years later and I was like, why the hell? And then I was there for I didn't never like lined up for the books, but like I had friends that did, and I think I went to one of them. Yeah, and I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I sort of grew up around that era too. It really was my generation, although I came to it a couple years later than kids my age did. I was there for it for sure. Yeah.
That's the thing. Like I went to the midnight releases. I did the am I paused here? Okay, I'm back.
No, you're good.
I did the midnight releases. I did the midnight of the films. Like I dressed up for all of that stuff. Like for me, it was a part of my identity. I would ask people, okay, what's your name? Do you like Harry Potter? And
you and my wife would get along. That's not her entire identity, but
it's not
it was
anymore, but it definitely was for a strong period of time. But like as soon as I would read through it, I'd go, okay, right back to the beginning, because I just know that I'm going to find something. I'm going to love it. It's comfortable and
it's comfortable.
It's comfortable. Right. And then I don't think I felt that again until I read ACOTAR, and I had such a fun time with it that I was like, great. And then as soon as I read Warlord, I felt it for the third time, and I was like, I would reread this instantly.
Maybe I need to try ACOTAR.
Yeah, it's so fun, honestly. Like that's what I'm saying. I feel like it's so difficult, and I was talking to Josh about this in regards to Spirit Cuts Through Water, that we get the back blurb, right, for books, and you go in sometime. If I'm not a back blurb reader, I usually go in blind, but if you are a back blurb reader, you just have the basic premise of the book. I feel like sometimes it is almost better if we go in how to read a book, because I feel like the experience will be much more appreciative. Like for me, everyone kept telling me with Spear, they were like, don't think too hard about the first 60 pages. And I was like, you all don't know me very well if you are telling me to do that. Because I will overanalyze this until my eyes bleed. When I read it, I sat back and I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, if someone had told me to read this the way that I read the Iliad, I would have gone into this with an inherently different experience. Because even though the book is classified as fantasy, it should, I think, be read more as an epic. And I think that completely changes the way that one would approach the book. The same way that I would say to someone who wants to read ACOTAR, do not go into this expecting that you are going to have like a life-altering experience, which you might, like I did, because it's become a part of my personality. But go into it expecting that you're going to have a good time, but it's not going to be earth-shattering in the terms of its prose, the way that it's revolutionized writing or anything like that. It's just going to be fun, you know? And I think
it found a niche, and it perfected it, and it appealed to a whole group of people.
Yep.
What do you say to the criticism or the comment that like those are like girl books? Like they're girl books.
I think it's so ridiculous. So I think first and foremost, I think it's really funny that it's kind of the same thing of what we were talking about earlier in terms of intelligence ascribing to
Yeah.
different books. It's the same way that we ascribe genders to specific books.
Because
I
there's
think
nothing wrong with targeting a
there's not.
demographic
There
and
is
saying
not.
this is for
And
you. You're gonna love, right?
exactly. And I
I
think
don't know.
it's interesting when, especially if we look at fantasy, because so much of fantasy for so long was targeted to men, right? There
True.
wasn't
Very true.
really that audience for women. And I mean, even if we look at
Like
epic
weirdly
fantasy
true.
that was being
Yeah.
written in the 80s and 90s, like Robert Jordan wrote Wheel of Time predominantly for a male audience. Like the female characters in that book are not written
I've
for
heard.
women, they're
Yeah,
written for
I've
men.
heard.
Yeah.
I get it.
So, you know, it's a very interesting time in that we have, you know, women's fiction, we have romantasy, and romantasy in terms of sales for fantasy is the number one genre or subgenre of fantasy that's like earning right now. So clearly there is a strong demographic for these books, but I have seen and know plenty of men that have read Akhtar and have had a good time, or that have read Throne of Glass and enjoyed it. I had a friend that read Fourth Wing and he loved it, you know? So it's like,
Really?
I think
I have a
that,
lot of guy friends that loved Outlander,
yeah,
and a lot of girl friends that are like, like it wasn't really written for you guys. But like
mhm,
I have male friends that loved it. So like I don't know. It's hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Simon here in the chat, where did you go, Simon? I just saw you.
And
He and
also,
I talk about this all the time. Yeah.
yeah,
He reads contemporary romance, he reads romantasy, and we talk about this all the time because like Emily Henry is a contemporary romance author, and I had never read any of her stuff until this year. I had never read contemporary romance, period. And she has now quickly become one of my favorite authors ever. She's incredible. Incredible. Like talk
yeah.
about character work. Oh my God, she's amazing. And I think it's a way to try to keep people in a very specific niche in a box and kind of pat them on
Sure,
the head and go,
sure.
good for you, you know?
Right.
But I think it's ludicrous when we think about it because I don't think there is no genre that is going to work for everybody. There is no
True.
author that is going to work for everybody. Are there certain demographics of people that will traditionally gravitate more towards a certain thing? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it is only meant to be read by them.
Yeah, that's good because I like to be surprised, and
Mhm.
you know, like Song of Achilles, like yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people that loved it, and I was kind of surprised I checked out, to be honest with you. And I don't think
Yeah.
I would have not liked it. I just wasn't feeling the way things were going, so I just kind of checked
Mhm.
out for a bit. But I like to be surprised, and like Song of
Yes.
Achilles is a good example where it's like a homosexual romance set in this like mythological period that like I don't really read a whole lot of. Yes, I'm Greek, but like it's not what I would pick up necessarily as fantasy. And
Mhm.
I was just like, oh, this is like I was trying to describe it, and I heard the term Achillean romance, which I had never heard before, because I guess
Yeah.
it's male identifying that are still attracted to other men. And I
Mhm.
was like, this is probably not written by, and my point there was written by a female author, right?
Yep.
And I was like, I don't know, is this going to work? And like, I loved it.
Mhm.
And so I want to get surprised, and I want to kind of break down that door of like, this isn't really you're not supposed to like this, or
Yes.
it would be weird if you did like it. Like, I kind of just
Mhm.
want to forget about that. And that's why I was curious what you thought,
Yeah.
as someone who enjoyed those a lot, you know?
That's the thing. It's very funny to me because I kind of identified myself more with, I almost want to say like masculine fantasy. And that when
Mm.
people would ask me, okay, like what's your favorite fantasy books? I would say A Song of Ice and Fire. Like that's what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
And they'd
Bro
go,
fantasy. Yeah.
well, right? Like that's a bit intense. And I'm
So
like,
weird.
well, that's the answer. So I don't know what to tell you. Like I like grim, dark fantasy. Like that's why I love Joe Abercrombie. So it's funny when people then talk to me and I go, oh, I love Akhtar, you know, because those get classified on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And
Totally.
I think part of the problem, and this is kind of a booktube thing also, is that the algorithm wants us to be in a very specific niche and not verge out of that, right? So you accrue an audience that is expecting you to follow like epic fantasy for you. Well, you like Malice a lot, so you'll probably like Canis, and you'll probably like Wheel of
Mhm.
Time, and you'll probably like, Stormlight. Whereas with me, I came on here and my thing off the bat was I like fantasy and I don't like romance and fantasy. So the algorithm said, okay, she likes Joe Abercrombie, Brandon Sanderson, A Song of Ice and Fire, and occasionally there is an odd other book that we throw in here. Like, that's it. And I came out with my Romantasy videos and the algorithm was like, absolutely not. And I think, it was reflective that a lot of people were really surprised by that because they had kind of come to perceive my only liking these things. Whereas a person external to BookTube and external to the internet, I go, I'm pretty open to most things. I'm willing to try different genres. I'm willing to read different things. Like in my writers group, one of our members writes horror. I don't read horror ever. And I've read his now and I'm like, I don't hate it. But I'm like, it's still not going to be the thing that I pull off the shelf desperately itching to read, but I've read it now and can say, yeah, sure. So I think it's part of that we get very comfortable in what we've identified as our genre. And a lot of the time when we have that comfortability, we don't really want to leave that bubble sometimes. And I think if you're a creator, I think you sometimes externally feel that pressure that you can't.
Yeah. I'm a little bit, I feel a little bit liberated coming back to BookTube and not having, I'm kind of just winging it now and reading a little bit of whatever. And you asked me, am I reading a little bit more variety these days for any specific reason? Like I'm kind of just going with the flow, mood reading, and like the algorithm be damned. Like if I want to read ACOTAR and talk about it, I'm going to read ACOTAR. Like
I think you should, and then we can have a live and we can talk about ACOTAR.
What a crazy and here's what's also preventing me from starting it. My wife, because of that friend that we share, she started it too. She's like, can you like, let's get these books and then we can like just have them and like try them. So she tried them and she didn't get very far in the first book. Okay. My wife, but me and my wife don't overlap a whole lot. I've gotten her to read some books that she's liked. She likes a lot that I don't. It's hard to peg with her where I'm going to land. So just because she didn't like it doesn't mean I won't.
Absolutely.
Like Nevernight. I'm like, oh, like I think you're going to like Nevernight. I know she won't. So, but like you know what I mean? But I do.
Yeah.
So I don't know. She's going to be like, hell. Yeah.
It's funny because I had that same reaction. So we had a really stressful start to our year. And I texted my best friends who are also readers. They don't read as much as me, but they still read regularly. Like they're always reading a book. And they'd been pressuring me for months. They kept saying, we think you are going to like Fourth Wing. And I kept going, no, that's not, no, that's, and I finally messaged them and said, okay, where do I start with this thing, And I had so much fun that I went, okay, where do I go from here? And then it was a journey into ACOTAR. But they had been telling me to read ACOTAR for years. My friend kept saying specifically, she's read it for years. And she kept telling me repeatedly, Laura, I know you're going to like this book. And I kept saying, no, I'm not. It's smut. Because that's literally what I kept hearing because the algorithm kept feeding me, it's smut. And I finally said, I enjoyed Fourth Wing. I'll trust you and I'll see how this goes. My experience reading the first ACOTAR book, it took me a while to get into it, probably about like the first 60 to 70 pages. I found it was a bit slow. And I then started settling into my rhythm and I was like, okay, I'm here. I can vibe. And then by the time I got to book two, I was like, this is my vibe. I am here. I'm thriving. And that is now one of my favorite books of all time. I friggin' love it. The second book specifically.
Wow, interesting.
So it's funny how sometimes other people know you in a way that you think you have a very clear opinion of what it is you're going to like. And they go, no, I know you. And they end up being right sometimes.
I used to think that I didn't like romance and I didn't even really like romance in my books. I would try and pick books that I sort of knew didn't drive that way for too long. But some of the books like on my top 10 list, like In Faithful and the Fallen, one of the best relationships that I've read. I just love it. Just hits me every time. And then in Warlord Chronicles too, like there's a
Oh,
romance in there where I'm just like, it's so
it's
beautiful. And I just,
incredible. It's incredible.
so there are some of the best books that I've read have, of course, Song of Achilles, which is very, that relationship is the heart of the story.
Yep.
There's so much in my favorites that have that, you know what I mean? So many
Mhm.
that have romance in there. And so
Yeah.
my point is I'm starting to learn a little bit more about myself as a reader. And I
Mhm.
know if I don't like something, the reasons why or why not, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So
Absolutely.
so
It's
I
funny
like to
because
get surprised. I'm
I
just
feel
trying
that way
different
too.
things now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because when I read the Cosmere last year, I sat back and I thought about it. Okay, which book is my favorite in the Cosmere?
Yeah.
And it's Warbreaker. And
I
Warbreaker
actually
has a
like
romance.
it. I actually liked it maybe the least,
Interesting.
which shocked me a lot. I liked Warbreaker. I read it
Yep.
not that a couple months ago. I liked
Mhm.
it, but I was like, I thought this was going to be one of my favorites, and I was kind of
Interesting.
surprised and disappointed that it wasn't. And you're right. But the romance in there, I didn't love.
There you go. See, I
I liked
actually
it,
really
but
enjoyed it.
it didn't like get me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, all right,
So
whatever.
I totally get it. It's one of those books that I feel can really go either way for people that you're gonna love it or
Yeah.
it's not gonna hit for you. I feel like there's not many people that land in the middle on
Yeah.
Warbreaker. But
Okay.
it's funny for me because I felt very similarly when I sat back and thought about books that have ranked really high for me. And romance
Yeah, people
has
love it.
been a very central part of those things. Like even First Law has weird
Yeah.
romance
Yeah.
in it. Like he
Yeah.
writes romance hilariously for me. I
Yeah.
love it because it's so dark. But in Cersei, it's like there are multiple love stories,
Okay.
including like learning to love yourself. Like that is a really big part of it,
Cool.
and
Okay.
I've come to realize that too, that for me, if it's done well, then it is a shining beacon in and
Okay.
amongst the narrative for me, as opposed to there are many books that don't have it that I still really enjoy, but I do
Yeah.
find that it is an added layer that I do appreciate when it's done really well.
Can it detract from a story? If is there a series or a book that you really liked where the romance was just massacred and you're like, why was this here? This was
Let
done
me think.
poorly. It just ruined it for you almost.
So it didn't ruin it for me. I didn't love it in Mistborn era 1
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Same.
yeah,
Well,
I think
actually, no, I kind of did like it.
the thing is for me, it has to do more with age. I feel like when a character is 16 or
Okay.
17 and they're being kind of thrust into that relationship, even though I
You're
was in a
right. You're
fairly
right.
serious relationship at
But
16.
what about the way that it wraps up and ends? Was that did you not did it not
I
fix
don't
it?
like the ending of Mistborn. I'm very much in the minority that I do not
Okay.
like the ending. So,
Okay.
book 3 is actually my least favorite of the original trilogy.
Wow.
Yeah, book 2 is my favorite, which is a
Book
hot
two. A lot of
take.
that is a hot take. I really liked book two as well.
Yeah, it's the politics in it. I absolutely love the
I liked
politics
it.
in it.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's another book that really went off the rails for me because of the romance. I feel like there is. But honestly, Wheel of Time is another big one that I feel like I would enjoy significantly more if the romance plots weren't as prominent, because I feel like he didn't know how to do that well. But again, I think it was targeted to a very specific demographic of people that were like, this is great. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially since we've seen what other people can kind of do with that. Yeah, I didn't like the end of Final Empire. That's fair, Evie. That's fair. I don't think Sanderson and you are meant to be together, but it's interesting when you kind of learn more about yourself as a reader. You can kind of pick up on the things that really work for you and what doesn't work
Yeah.
for you in terms of tropes and themes and all that kind of stuff. So, do you feel like there's a trope for you? Is it a chosen one thing that you kind of go, yeah, I'm interested in that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I like chosen one
Yeah.
tropes for sure. I'm trying to think of some prevalent ones. I don't like love triangles very much. I
Okay.
like a good romance, but once it
Yep.
starts getting kind of messy, I'm like I'm kind of
Yeah.
out. Unless it needs to be done very,
Really
very
well.
well, and I think it's
Yeah.
rare, and just by default, I'm not a fan.
Hmm.
Um, throw some tropes at me. I'm trying. It's been a while since
Right?
I've like,
So,
yeah,
okay, I love
thought about
found
it.
family. For me,
Oh,
found
found family,
family is
100%.
like my biggest one.
Malice. Welcome to
Sort
the
of.
Banished Lands.
Here's the thing I will say if we want to go back to Sarah J. Maas for a second,
Okay.
she knows how to write a found family really well. I really,
Hey,
really
cool.
enjoy that about her
Cool.
books. Yeah.
Found family, I love it.
Yeah.
Orphan farm boy goes on a quest.
Yeah.
Chosen one, definitely. Yeah. Found family is actually a big one. I appreciate you mentioning that. It comes from me being an only child and not
Okay.
having a whole lot of family here in Canada.
Sure.
And so found family, all I have is found family. All
Yeah.
my friends are family, right? At some point.
Right.
And so yeah, I love that. And when it's done really well, it just you feel like you're just part of the crew. And it's just nice. It's touching when it's
Yeah.
done well. You know what I mean? So
It's I love that because it's a different way to feel immersed in
yeah.
the story. I don't know if it's a
I also
controversial thing.
like I don't know if this is a trope, but I
Mhm.
also really like platonic male relationships, but also platonic male female friendships. I
This is
do really
something
like
I
that.
wrote into my book specifically because I wish we had
And there's
more of
not
this in
enough more of it.
fantasy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was one of the main things I wanted when I started writing because I have a few very wonderful relationships in my life that are inherently platonic. And I was like, this is not something that we see enough. It's always, oh, well, they're going to become a love interest. And I established very early off the bat, I'm like, they are not going to be a love interest. Like these are two people that are family to each other. And that is, this is it.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
I love a found family. And also I found it for me, it's not a trope, it's just a style of writing. I prefer first person to third person because I feel like I get immersed with the character a lot faster and I prefer it that way.
I didn't know, like, third person is so common. And I feel like first person has been sort of butchered in many books, right?
Yeah.
It's a little tricky to do. And then there are different first persons where like sometimes in first person, usually you don't know more than the main character knows. And that can be frustrating. And sometimes they're holding, like in The Will of the Many, it's first person, whatever you would call it. And he's sort of holding back some info from you because he already knows what happened or he's keeping secrets. So he's like, we're not going to talk about that. And you're like, I want you to talk about this.
I want you to talk about this right now.
Right. But it's done really well. And it sort of all comes together. And he's like, oh yeah, well, remember that's kind of why we did that. Right.
Yeah.
And it reminded me a little bit of Sun Eater as well. So Sun Eater is a very good example of first person done to perfection.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm really excited to read it. Yeah.
And I agree. If it's done well, I'm starting to really like first person. And it does feel very immersive. And I feel like I'm going along. I know. I think I will. I will. That might be the next like sci-fi book I pick up.
I'm excited for you to read it. Honestly, I think it's going to hit all the right notes for you, especially the first 3 books. I think that's going to be a sweet spot.
Well, the first book is not that long, so maybe I'll fit it in sooner.
It's not, honestly. My husband read it in a day. Yeah,
I'd love to be able to do that.
Right? He kind of, my mother was here and he was like, I'm going to go downstairs and just read today. And I said, how about it? And he came upstairs.
If I could bang out a book in a day, I would
it be amazing?
Dude, I love it. How about Kyle, who reads like 7 books a day?
I know. Kyle is.
Sometimes I do the math and I'm like, I don't know how that's possible.
I had a couple of those earlier this year when I was reading my contemporary romance books because they're really quick and I was listening to the audio and I was finishing them in like 4 hours. So I was like, I could do 2 of these in a day. And I kind of did for a couple of them.
The right book, at the right speed. This Murakami, actually, I'm doing it on audio. I have the ebook, but I got the library hold that came through and that's why I just jumped on it because I'm like, my library hold's here. Like, I'm just going to read it. And I'm blitzing through it pretty quick. It reads, it's weird, but it reads quickly. And so I can see that. That'll be like a 2-day, 3-day book for me for sure.
For sure. I love a good, weird book.
Yeah, it is, but not, well, there's some sex in that one. I'm telling you, there are some thoughts. There are some thoughts as sort of, it's third person, but he's sharing some intimate thoughts, the narrator, where you're like,
I like that though.
Interesting.
I honestly really like that because, and this is something I've talked about pretty regularly. Derry has been here and has added to this conversation beautifully, but In fantasy, we've ignored sex for so long, and it's just not realistic, especially when we have our protagonists that are 16, 17. I'm like, they are walking hormones. Okay. You
True.
cannot tell me that this is something that never comes across their brains, because it's the exact opposite. Let's be real, the exact opposite.
It's
So
true.
I feel like
It's true.
we're now starting to get this shift where more authors are slowly incorporating it into their plots, even if it's a Joe Abercrombie where it's very absurdist and absolutely kind of off the wall, and just it adds to the story, but it's a character building thing. Or in some cases, it's just primal, where people are
Yeah.
like, this
Yeah.
is what we do. And I'm like, both are valid, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's
True.
great.
It's a fine line for me. I do find there are times where it hasn't really happened often, but I can see it happening where it's like too much, and I'm like, okay, now I'm more like, I didn't pick up this book
Yeah.
like to make sex, you know?
Right.
I pick
Yeah.
up this book to read and have a story and disappear for a while. And if there's
Yes.
sex in it, that's totally fine. But
Mhm.
there might be a couple chapters where I'm like, oh man, I kind of just want to know like what's going on over here, because like
Right.
I'm not making sex, like, you know, I'm reading it, but I'm not there. How good can it be, you know?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think for me there's a fine line of like, okay, like let's keep it moving, and then sometimes it comes up and it creeps up on you, and I'm like, oh, that was the perfect moment at the perfect time, and it helps for all these reasons or whatever. But like you said,
Yes.
sometimes it can just be primal. And I read
Yeah.
I can't remember what book it was, but it was kind of like a survival-ish type book, and like there was some stuff because there wasn't a whole lot to do, and so
Yeah.
in those situations it's very realistic as well. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Sexy times keeps things moving. I mean, here's the thing. I think
That's
in
true.
certain cases, it can add so much to a story, because you can learn so much about a character in those moments, how they interact with themselves, what they think of themselves, and all of that kind of stuff. It can just, I think it can add so much. So
I
I'm
agree.
all for us starting to venture into this new era of fantasy where we maybe incorporate things more realistic in that sense to our, you know, our human existence. But either way, I am super excited for you to venture into
Me too.
our ACOTAR journey. I'm so excited.
I'm gonna have to start at how long is the first book? Like how?
Oh, it's not long. It is not long. I think it's like.
Okay, but I won't judge it on the first book, right? I shouldn't judge
No.
the series. Okay.
I mean, I'm hoping you'll like it.
How many subs do you think I'll lose when I mention in a TBR I'm going to read ACOTAR?
I think you'll actually gain.
This is what we're trying to fight.
I think you will gain subs, because I think people really dig when they see men reading Sarah J. Maas. So I think you will do just fine. So it is 416 pages in the hardcover, but the font is really big. So
okay, cool.
Yeah,
I can gauge that. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I think you'll do just fine with this, but I'm jazzed for you to read it.
It's going to be weird when I read ACOTAR and I tell my wife that I liked it, but she stopped reading it because she didn't like it. Like, do we get divorced then? Like, what do we do? Do we just go we can like different things?
You'll have to figure it out. This is going to be the next phase of your booktube journey.
Totally. Back to booktube, ACOTAR.
Right? Oh, I'm super excited for you. Okay.
So and then we'll reread Warlord.
Done.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm excited. The last question I always like to ask people is, what is something that you are looking forward to reading in the next little bit?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me just whip out Goodreads over here. Give me a moment. There's so much. Is there any like parameters around that, or just a book that I'm like looking forward to?
A book you're looking forward to.
That's a good question. You know what I'm looking forward to? I'm looking forward to Dance with Dragons, because I haven't read it yet. I finished Feast and I loved it. And I think Dance comes back to some characters that I've been missing for a while.
Yeah.
And I know that neither one on their own, you know, there's conflicting views on these books, but I'm excited to get back to that one, because then I can say I'm caught up with the series. And when Winds of Winter comes out, as it inevitably will, then I'll read it. Yeah, right around the corner.
I'm not going to say anything about that, but yes.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. I have a feeling.
Yeah, there you go. My wife didn't like ACOTAR, and yet we're doing fine, Theo. 19th anniversary on Sunday. We just don't talk about Sarah J. Maas.
Interesting. Okay.
Simon's goals. So, I'm telling you.
So, but did Simon like it?
Yeah, he loves it.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah, he loves it.
Maybe I'll have to report back to Simon. I'll read it and
Absolutely.
we'll chat again. Yeah.
I am super excited. Well, thank you so much for coming to
Thank
hang out
you.
with me. I am so
This was my
honored
first
that
live in more than a
exactly.
year,
I'm
so
so
I'm so
honored
happy.
that it was on my channel.
I
Tell
love
the
it.
good people of BookTube where they can find you, Theo, with your new Akatar channel.
Yes, Akatar Reader is the name of the channel now. Rekindled Reader is the channel, and it's been around for a couple years, and then there was nothing for a year, and now I'm sort of back to reading and making videos. So you'll find
That's
me on
awesome.
YouTube only.
As always, everyone, thank you so much for coming to hang out with us. If you would like to help support the channel, we've got a Patreon now where we're doing our book club and all of that fun stuff that you can come talk about the book with us as they read it. And you can also vote on what books we're going to read, give suggestions, all of that. I appreciate everyone coming to hang out with us, even though the Olympics were on.
They're so nice.
Right? Like, this is probably strategically not the best time as everyone is wanting to watch the opening ceremonies, but either way, super appreciate you all being here. Go give Theo some love and a like if you haven't been following him. But hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next time.
Bye guys. Thank you.